Hi, and welcome to Form Now. We are in the middle of a segment, Meet the Professors. I am Taylor Kemp, the Form Platform Manager, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Mark Giszczak. Welcome.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here.
So, Dr. Giszczak, you are a professor of sacred scripture here at the Augustine Institute.
Yep.
How about we begin with, when did you come to the Augustine Institute to teach?
Oh, wow. Well, my own history with the Augustine Institute goes all the way back to the beginning.
It is illustrious.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I got recruited back in 2005. Mm-hmm. So I was a student at Ave Maria College in philosophy and theology, and had an interesting phone call or two with Tim Gray way back then. And I came as a student back in 2005, graduated in 2007.
And when did the school start?
2005.
So you were in the first class.
I was a member of the very first class, and then a member of the first graduating class. I think there were maybe 11 of us back in 2007. And then I did my doctoral studies after that. And then I got another call from Tim Gray in January of 2009 when I was living in Washington, D.C., asking if I would help with the distance education program that was getting started at the Augustine Institute. And by that summer, I was working basically full-time for the distance education program, and then came on board in 2010 to direct that program and to teach. Wow. So I moved here in, I think it was June of 2010.
Okay. And so how did you know Tim before you got that first call in 2005 to come as a student?
So he had been friends with some of my undergraduate professors that he had gone to grad school with. And when I expressed interest in doing further study in sacred scripture, my professors told me, you really need to talk to Tim Gray. So the first time I talked to him, I think was actually in the fall of 2004, I think. And he was giving me advice about applying to graduate programs and, what I needed to do to prepare myself.
And he convinced you to come to a startup graduate program.
Somehow, one thing led to another, and I ended up in Denver. So, it's just interesting how all these things work, especially as you reflect back on them. What an incredible turning point in my life, and how that has borne fruit in so many different ways.
Yeah, I feel like it'd be pretty amazing to be in the first class, because I mean, I don't know all the details, but it used to be in a different building. It was a much smaller class. The way that we did DE was all different. And then now seeing it as it is today, did you, I mean, this is a hard question, I guess, but back then when you were just starting, would you ever have imagined it would become what it is today?
I mean, it's so hard to think, I mean, when I first started at the Augustine Institute, there was one full-time employee in one cubicle rented over at the Archdiocese Chancery building, and we would rent classrooms over at the Chancery, which is where we had class. And I mean, it was a great building to be in, but all of the professors were part-time. I think Tim Gray was teaching at the seminary, and he was running the biblical school, and Jay Reyes, was working full-time at Focus, and he was the first president. And then I remember having a conversation with Ted Sri, when he was a professor at Benedictine, trying to convince him to come out to Denver. And I mean, it's just like, it's so funny reflecting back on that time, because so much has happened since then. And no, there's no way anybody could have predicted how quickly the Augustine Institute would have grown and really what it would have turned into. You know? I mean, even just when I came on board as a faculty member in 2010, before I walked in the door, there were only 6 employees. Yeah. Right?
That's not that long ago.
No, it's not. And now I don't know how many there are, but maybe a couple hundred. So it's, we're in a very different place than we were not that long ago. Yeah. And it's really just been great to watch it grow. Yeah.
So when you knew you wanted to go into graduate studies, had you known for a long time that you were interested in going into biblical studies?
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny, reflecting on your own growth and development and thinking about how you ended up in one place or another. And, I grew up in a community that really loves sacred scripture, and there were lots of Bible studies and things. And, I took Bible studies in high school, and I learned Latin in high school and all this sort of thing. So I was very interested in theology and scripture from an early age. For me, it's symbolized by the fact that I saved up my paper route money to buy the complete set of the early church fathers, which is like
how old 45
volumes or something when I was like 14.
That's a pretty clear sign.
I still have yet to read them all. So,
that's a pretty remarkable thing at 14.
Yeah. So, there were a lot of encounters and books and things that, led me in a particular direction to study theology. But yes, it did start very early.
Yeah. Okay. And so you go into graduate studies, and then when you were here studying as a student, did you know then too you did was the plan always to go on to further studies and get your doctorate after that?
That was certainly my hope.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can only plan so much and only,
Yeah.
you know, exert so much effort, and then you just have to see where the chips fall. But yeah, so I was very interested in doing that, you know, when I was still an undergraduate,
Mhm.
and then, you know, studying at the Augustine Institute, you know, encouraged that desire and led me in the right direction. So
And what was it when you were thinking about what you were going to study more in depth? What was it? Were there many different subjects that you were interested in within Scripture? Did you always have a particular interest?
yeah, I mean, this is one thing again where it's like it's almost like impossible to totally understand yourself,
Yeah.
you know. But it does seem like over time your intellectual interests narrow down to a kind of specialization. So for me, you know, first it was quite broad, and then it starts to narrow down. And I think, you know, I realized that you know, New Testament studies are wonderful, and I love the New Testament, but I realized that I was attracted to the Old Testament, and I felt like there was a lot of work that wasn't being done. And so to me, it seemed like it was a more fertile ground. And so that's sort of what led me to specialize in Old Testament at Catholic U. And I wrote my dissertation on the Song of Songs. So now I find myself kind of as a kind of wisdom literature kind of guy. But you know, I love the whole canon, Old Testament and New. And in fact, you know, for me, it's represented by my own efforts, right? So after, you know, I finished all the doctoral studies, I actually went on for more degrees at the Vatican. And there I specialized in New Testament. So I actually wrote a licentiate thesis on 2 Thessalonians.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow. That is, yeah. So you covered everything. Well, not exactly everything, but old and new.
Yeah.
So that's a nice segue into, could you just tell us what are the classes that you teach here?
Sure. So I usually teach our intro to Bible class, which we call Salvation History, where we do Genesis to Revelation in one term.
Yep.
So it's kind of boot camp for Augustine Institute students.
I will give a testament to that, because when I came to the graduate school, I had just converted maybe a year before. I had read very little of the Bible. And I remember looking at the syllabus, and I like kept looking like week after week. I was like, oh, we're about to cover basically the entire Bible, which I had read maybe some of the Gospels. And I remember the first paper that I wrote for that class, and let's just say it didn't go that well. And I was just overwhelmed. I was like, oh my gosh. And it's a boot camp. And then it's one of those classes when you finish it, you're just like, that was one of the best, most beneficial things. That was very difficult, especially for someone like me with not a ton of background in biblical knowledge, but it is a boot camp for sure.
Yeah, that's the hope, you know, it's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
It did. It was great. I was like, what a great thing that I will probably never again in my life do in such a concentrated way, which was great. Okay, so Salvation History,
do a lot of that, and then I typically teach our elective courses in Old Testament. So we've offered Psalms and Wisdom Literature, which is a great course. I love teaching that. And the prophets. So I do a kind of survey course of all of the prophets in one term. I've taught a few other courses that have been kind of one-offs. Like I did a course on the Book of Wisdom, the Wisdom of Solomon. And last year I did a course on divine worship in sacred scripture. Where we studied a lot about temple ideology.
And a suffering course, if I remember.
That's right. Yeah. And this summer I taught a course on theology of suffering.
Yep.
So so I've been doing quite a few things.
I've taken you for many classes. I had you for Salvation History,
right?
Wisdom Literature, and then I audited prophets, but I only made it about halfway through before my other classes took way. But it was awesome because I fell in love with Scripture through really the Augustine Institute, and it was awesome. I was like, I want to cover the whole Bible while I'm here, and so Wisdom and prophets were integral in that, because you don't do as much. You only do a little bit of those in Salvation History.
Right.
Which
it's mostly on the historical books.
Yeah. So that is a great service. So something I want to talk about too is, I want to talk about the school generally in terms of maybe a little bit of what is life like for you as a professor interacting with students here on campus.
Sure.
We can start there. And then I want to talk a little bit about the DE program, which being you were there kind of at its inception.
Yeah.
I just think that as a student that was both a DE student and an on-campus student, they're close to my heart. But so let's start with on campus. Could you just talk a little bit about what is life like here with the students, interacting with them, and a little bit about the culture?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that attracted me to come and study at the Augustine Institute was this hope that we could study theology in the context of Christian community. So, a lot of times theology just becomes kind of like another discipline at the university, and it just kind of is purely academic. And I came out of an environment that was very apostolic. And so I wanted to study scripture and theology in an environment that was truly apostolic. And I feel like that's what students find here in Denver.
For sure.
So whether that's because of, what the Augustine Institute is doing with all the kind of media ministry and, the ways in which they can participate in that, or whether it's because of other ministries that exist here in Denver, like Endow, which is in our building, or Focus, or just the Archdiocese of Denver and all the wonderful, vibrant parishes, it's really represented by the fact that some of the students do internships at local ministries and parishes. And I think that's a really kind of fruitful cross-pollination kind of thing going on here at the Augustine Institute. And I think it just shows, I think it just opens students' eyes to the idea that theology isn't some sort of dead, abstract subject, right? But it's actually, it's a way of breathing life into all of the ministries in the church, right? To study theology and to do it the right way with a kind of apostolic missionary outlook is a way of renewing the church from within. It's not just about knowing more trivia about what thinkers in the 1200s happen to have thought. It really is a way to come closer to God and to bring other people closer to God.
Yeah, and I would say that the testament, especially of working here now, seeing that in the lives of the students is very clear. And obviously when people come to study here, there's some interest already in doing some type of apostolic work. But when you're encountering our graduates, I feel like being one of them, but also knowing many of them, they all they want to do is bring that to other people, and they want to go serve the church in so many ways. So I would say that the desire of the school is in so many ways fulfilled as being a product of the school, myself, and just seeing so many of our graduates who all they want to do, they want to go anywhere, they want to go help, they want to go serve in this whatever way it is, which is just, it's really beautiful to see. So yeah, how about then, what is it like? Well, I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to add with in terms of on-campus students?
Oh, I mean, I was just going to say, like, one of the things that captures my heart about the Augustine Institute is that it's a community of builders. Like there's a way in which I think as Catholics in a post-Christian culture, we can always kind of live on the defensive or live in fear or be upset or angry at things that we see going on in the culture around us. But really at the Augustine Institute, the approach is one of building the civilization of love, right? Responding to the call of John Paul II to really, tell people about the gospel and build something. Like, don't just stand there in fear, right? Don't just cower in the corner, but like, let's do something. And that is so encouraging to me, right? I see the Augustine Institute not just as like, an interesting project, but rather it's really a catalyst for so many other people to engage in this apostolic work of building.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay, and so could you talk a little bit about the DE program? You could even give a little bit of the history of the DE program, maybe how it's evolved.
Sure.
And then just what is that like in terms of interacting with students and the life of a DE student?
Sure. Wow. Well, I mean, reflecting back on 2008, 9, and 10.
When we say DE, distance education, I realize that we at the Augustine Institute have students that come in, they're full-time students here on campus. And then we have many, many more students that can watch our classes online, and they're distance education students.
Yeah. So maybe the one way to think about this is with another acronym, which is DVD, right? So when we first started the distance education program, we had one camera in the back of the room filming a professor teaching, and then we would take a whole course of tapes, right, and burn them onto DVDs. We had this machine that would burn a DVD and then put a label on it, and then burn the next DVD and put a label on it, and it would take hours and hours and hours, because for each course, you'd probably get, I don't know, maybe a dozen, maybe 20 DVDs. Yeah. And so I remember at the beginning of each term, we had a kind of FedEx day where we laid out a box for every single student. And then depending on which courses you were taking, you would get 1 or 2 or 3 DVD packs. You'd get a printed out syllabus for each course. And maybe a graduate bulletin, and then some packing peanuts.
I love it. Yeah.
And we would ship all those out, and it was right around 2012, 2013 that we were able to make the transition to online video. And it's really been great, right?
Yeah.
That way, we can have, so it used to be, right, you took a course via distance ed. That course had been taught last year or last semester. But now you can take a course via distance ed and you're literally taking it at the exact same time as the people in the room. So that, while you're watching recorded videos, they might have been recorded yesterday or the day before rather than a year ago.
Yeah.
And so that's really valuable, I think, that we're able we've been able to pivot to online video. But what I love about our distance ed students, when we're talking about apostolic work and builders and like renewing Catholic communities, they're already doing that.
Yeah.
So many of our distance education students are already actively engaged in Catholic schools, Catholic parishes, Catholic dioceses. They're already engaged in the apostolic labor, but they need more training, right? They need more training. They want the master's degree. They want to do more, and but they can't exactly just up and move to Denver.
Yep.
And so we're able to come to them through the magic of the internet, and it's just a great blessing. Where so many times I've heard students say things like, what I learned last week in your classroom, I applied this week in my classroom.
Yeah.
And it just happens over and over and over again. Of course, it makes sense, right? What are we studying here, right? The teaching of the church and theology and scripture. So of course you're going to be using it if you're teaching theology and scripture and the teaching of the church in your classroom. And so it's so beautiful to just watch that happen like live, where the distance between receiving and giving is very short. And I just think it makes the distance education program really valuable.
Yeah, it was when I was a distance ed student, after I came to the church, I fell in love with just reading theology books, then came to the AI, and I had no plans on really doing anything else with that. I was playing soccer at the time, and because of how just infectious and life-giving it was to study, I started like doing Bible studies on the exact thing that we were going over the week before in salvation history with some of my teammates. And it was awesome, like seeing them transform their lives and the interest of it. And so, there's something so infectious of when you're coming to know God more and you're spending more time with him in prayer, that all you want to do is you're like, well, I've got to go do something. And you can just do that right away. So that I agree, as a distance ed student, even though I didn't have like a formal way of doing that, it was awesome. Like taking what you're receiving, then giving it right back. So with just a little bit of time that we have left here, I always end with the two questions.
Okay, great.
Some favorite saints or some favorite intercessors for your work or life.
Yeah. So maybe oddly, I really like Saint Bonaventure.
Okay.
And there are so many wonderful things about him. Great theologian, great Franciscan, he renewed the order and helped the church on a grand scale. But my favorite anecdote about him is when he was appointed to be a cardinal. The papal legate shows up at the friary where he's living, and they want to talk to Bonaventure, and he's doing the dishes.
Okay.
So
great.
He tells them, hang the hat on the tree out there and wait outside until I'm done with the dishes, and then we can come and talk, And I just love his dedication to his duty and his kind of humility and simpleness in that he's a great model for me.
Yeah, he's a great model of humility. Okay, and then favorite book of the Bible to teach. This is always a hard question.
Well, right now it's the Wisdom of Solomon.
Okay.
Yeah, the Wisdom of Solomon. I just wrote a commentary on it, which will hopefully come out next year. So I'm really excited about wisdom, and I think more people need to know about it.
Yes, I would agree. I loved the wisdom literature class that you taught. And then lastly, just to wrap up, I wanted to highlight that you have 2 short courses available on our short course platform. Short courses are kind of a hybrid between some of the things that are available on Formed and then our full-scale graduate classes. I would say they're abbreviated, but they're quite substantial in terms of content.
Sure.
You have 2 courses. One is on wisdom literature.
Yep.
And then
that one just came out. Yep.
Great. And then the other is the story of the Old Testament.
Right.
Which is abbreviated salvation history in some ways.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's tiny by comparison with the course you took, but yeah.
Yes. So please check those out. We will have links in the show notes or in the description for this that you can look at. And then you also have a Lighthouse CD of the Month coming out.
That's right.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Leviticus Explained, right? So, Leviticus is a confusing book.
Yes.
A lot of people just skip over it,
Bible in a year, they get to Leviticus and they're like, I'm out. Yes.
And in this particular talk, I just kind of go through, like, what is it all about? How do we make heads or tails of what we're reading here?
Awesome. Yeah. All right. So you can look out for that. We will get that on Formed, I'm sure, pretty soon after that. So thank you so much for joining us. If you're at all interested in the Augustine Institute Graduate School, we will also have a link for that. You can preview a course and take a look. May God bless you.